Hello, this is Mitch from Explori, being joined here today by Gary Coombs from IMEX. Hi Gary, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well.
Lovely stuff. Thank you so much for your time. It is much appreciated. To get started here, I guess if you wouldn't mind, just give me a bit of an introduction to yourself and IMEX and what you do, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Yep, sure. So I'm the COO IMEX. I've been here around, well, it's getting on for 5 years now. IMEX, we run two global events, one in Frankfurt and one in America, serving the events community and the, large scale exhibitions with content as well as, exhibition.
Yeah, good stuff. So, yeah, I guess really for your time today and just to talk you through of some of what you've done recently, what's changed, what's new, and it's also really for exploring where we've worked with you as well to just talk through, I guess, some of the changes in the implementation and things where using data and insight to really continue to perform well and shape what you're doing. So really to start off the opening conversation here, since you joined the business, I guess 5 years ago now. If you could talk through, I guess, sort of what main changes or the biggest changes in your time, what you've brought in and what you've changed, or anything else that's changed in your time.
Yeah, I think the needs of the people in general and the exhibition world have massively evolved over the last 5, 10 years. And in whilst I've been here, we've gone through a big transformation in, especially from our technology, but we tend to not approach it as technology first. We like to think of it, or the way I've approached it very much is people and process first. The technology is more the enabler, but ultimately what we have done is transformed the underlying technology to set us up for the future. So we moved from a partner we'd been with for a long time to recognizing that actually what we do as an events business is a bit different to everyone else, and it wasn't as straightforward as just buying something off the shelf. So we've moved to a model of building some things ourselves, partnering where we need to partner, trying to make the best of everything across the board.
Just, and I know if you're talking about things not being technology first, but being people led and people being the sort of the needs of what you're doing here, could you just talk me through in a bit of detail what that process looks like for you? How do you identify where technology can help and where in some cases things do need to be, people at the front of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think when we started out on this, it was very clear. Like when I came in, Karina said to me, whatever you do, don't tell me that we need to replace our technology. I think I gave it 2 weeks and I said, we need to replace our technology, because what I could see was people internally were working very inefficiently. There was workaround upon workaround upon workaround. And it was very clear to me that the technology wasn't the enabler, the technology was the blocker. And so we stripped that all back to look at how do we want to operate? How do we want to serve our customers? And approaching it from that angle rather than going, let's look at this technology and just buy it. That in my experience doesn't really work. And so we set on a path of looking what are the things that our customers are looking for, what are the internal needs, and then using all those different data points. Because some of it, a really key data point is, of course, your gut and your intuition. We've got people who have been with this business for a long time. We're very fortunate in that. And they understand our customers. And that's key to IMEX's success, is the relationships we have. And they have helped us then look at how do we deliver for that. And then a key point is then the Explori data. When we do that survey after every show, I've never experienced an events business like what we get in the scores that we get. We're so high, but we don't rest on our laurels. We're always looking for what are those little things? What are those frustration points? Where can we make that change and adoption? And some of that in the early days of when I started, it was very clear that things were outdated. The meetings process was difficult. The app was not giving people the experience that we wanted them to have. And so there were some very quick wins we could do. But yeah, that continues to be an important part of constant drive to improve and to just change things as we go and transform. It's not change for change's sake. We like to do things because they feel like the right thing to do.
Yeah, some very good points. And I guess just to sort of to dig a bit deeper into some of the things that you mentioned, and you've brought it up yourself already, around IMEX, for both of the events that we work with, the Americas and for the Frankfurt event as well, is actually for where those scores are so high. for context, the scores for your shows historically have been amongst the top events that we work with worldwide. By our overall event score metric, you're sort of the top 10th percentile, top 5th percentile, some of the editions as well. So actually, I guess from where you're building on, very good as far as customer experience metrics are concerned, coming in where you're building on something that's already successful to continue to get there and to continue to ensure that you're keeping up with, I think, what you've mentioned already, the changes in people, changing technologies, and what people expect from shows. That I know in the case of IMEX as well, it is mentioned already, is different, I guess, from the average trade show. So actually, sort of the needs and what you get from your data, I guess, is different in some cases. Just one of the points you mentioned around actually utilizing data, that the Explori for data, which is captured predominantly, that's your post-event surveys and your research that you're conducting, but I guess with other data you're capturing as well. Could you just talk me through that process of where you're capturing data across any of your sources or across Explori specifically, what that process looks like from sort of taking data in to actually then implementing it, or at least working towards making changes as a result?
Yeah, and I would say we're not perfect at it by any means. It's an ever-moving beast, and one of the things that I was really keen when I joined was to make sure we had consistency in that data, so that actually, because when I looked historically, I couldn't trust the data. It wasn't done in a structured way that I could rely on to really, I make this change, it's going to have this effect. And so we invested time, effort into upskilling the team to be able to make sure that we're capturing data in a way that we could repurpose it. Whereas before we used to build reports when people asked for it, we now have live dashboards and reporting so everyone can see right across the business. And that's something that's it is important to me that everyone has access to the same insights. Like, we shouldn't be waiting for a report to be delivered on a Friday to tell you how the numbers are performing. They're there at a touch of a button, refreshed I can't remember what it is, every hour, I think, for the exact timing, but they're constantly refreshed throughout the day so that we can constantly get that view and we can kind of see where there's changes, and we're tracking now year on year as well to see how we're performing. We've made some adjustments to when we went live with registration, when we went live with reimbursements, because we're trying to flatten out the curve and make sure that we give our customers the best experience, as well as making it more efficient and effective for our internal as well, to make sure that their workload is as balanced as it can be. Obviously, you've got those peaks of the event. It's going to get bigger at certain points, but it's how do we flatten that as much as possible.
Yeah, very good stuff. Thank you. Again, to focus on one thing you've just mentioned, which is something that, at least me personally, as well as I would say that everybody here at Explori is very keen and passionate on, is actually ensuring that there is data for everybody, to really ensure that there's something for everybody, that everybody gets what they need from this process. And the fact that it's transparent as well, that actually that you have across any of your teams, there is that accessibility to data to ensure that everybody is sort of on the same page, to ensure that it isn't just sort of it's data and insight for the few, but it actually is for whoever you are, whatever your role is in your business, that you do at least have some metrics or some insight into what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the world is changing as well with the introduction of AI to, it's not an introduction anymore, but the evolution of AI means that, and we're working on this right now, is how do you bring that data in a way that you can ask the questions of AI to do that analysis for you, because that's where the world is moving to. There's no longer just static reports. It's being able to interrogate the data, being able to ask the questions of the data. But to get that right, you've really got to invest in making sure that model is right underneath. And then it's training people in how to ask the right questions of AI. You can't just say how many people, you need to give it more context, and that's a really important part. And going back to the data points, one of the things we did early on is we made sure all data was coming in, not just around who's registering and so on, but we ensured that everyone has access to lead scanning, so that then all of that data can also be collected in a consistent way. We've got wayfinding to support people's movement around the show, which came up, a few times in Explori, and we acted on that and implemented some blue dot technology. So all of those data points are then things we can use to drive some insight in the way people are moving around the show. And that isn't about it's about making the show better. It's about how can we ensure there's not bottlenecks at certain points, that we've got the layout right. It helps us just continually improve.
Yeah, and one thing as well, yeah, you've mentioned around sort of lead scanning as one example, I guess, where that's been a relatively a big decision early on, to ensure that was something. And I think the quote that I gathered we mentioned before, I think, was doing the right thing, and actually where decisions which potentially may not have been obvious or straightforward for everybody involved, where data is involved, and to have that that thought and idea of actually how to be more data savvy, data native to ensure that's a part of the show's offering. Could you, I guess, talk me through, I guess, that sort of the decision around, I guess, of that lead scanning process of how that was implemented? I guess any challenges you faced there, and I guess what have been the benefits, upon reflection?
Yeah, I think that it was a decision that we made. I wouldn't say we made it lightly, but we made a conscious choice that we thought it was right that everyone should have lead scanning, because I've worked on other events companies, worked like as an exhibitor, and lead scanning is, or even booking meetings, you can have everyone doing it a completely different way. And that doesn't help you as an exhibitor or us as the organizer to understand where people are going and what they're doing. So by allowing everyone to have lead scanning as part of their offering, it just seemed like the natural progression. And the positive of it, of course, is now everyone has their leads in one consistent place, along with all their meetings. Everything is just in one place for them to access. We can start to provide some insights for them. And some of the things we're looking at is how can we further that insight to help them, looking at year on year. And also, I mean, the added benefit, of course, is you get bigger app adoption. And by having bigger app adoption, it means we can help people find their way around the show easier. We can communicate with people easier. And so there's added benefits to it from a attendee point of view, as well as from us, from helping them have a better experience.
Good stuff. So just to prod a bit more, some of the points that you've made earlier and to talk through, I guess, in a bit more detail. I guess just really sort of for all the different things that you've said, and I guess for where my head is racing to, I guess it's actually just talking around where insight sits when it comes to planning. And there have been some points, I guess, that you've mentioned already. And, we talked about, where transparency is there for people to see data and I guess to receive that. But then could you just talk me through in some detail, want that you have that process, you're receiving data, the teams are aware it's there. If you have any examples of actually how that then makes it back into the planning cycle, or for any changes that are made as a result.
Yeah, I think there's many points of how the planning cycle gets fed by data, and we're getting better at it. I wouldn't say we are perfect. And some of the key things that we've seen over the last few years is the evolution of the relationship of what we call partners, but basically the people who are exhibiting on the main stand. We've seen some evolutions to that, we need to change how we talk to them, and that's come out of the survey. We've seen it in the data. And then from that, we start to then put that into our annual planning cycle to make sure we've got goals and things that we're working on to help evolve that. And then we can use the surveys to measure the performance of that and see whether what we've done has had an impact. Because no matter how hard you try, you're never going to get everything perfect. So it's a way of testing, learning, and moving forward. But we do that generally on our annual cycle because we have a relatively tight turnaround between Frankfurt and America. So it's not impossible to make changes, but it's harder to make changes between Frankfurt and America. Downtime is a bit more after America. I lose that loosely because it used to always feel like that was a long time, and now that seems to have been, it's eaten up because we're constantly wanting to strive to do better. I think that's what's really lovely in this business is we're not just saying, oh, we're performing really well, let's just do what we do. We want to do more. We want to make sure we're giving the best experience. And so taking these data points, taking the elements that come up in the survey, taking what we see out in the industry as well. They're all valuable points for us to work out, right, what's our goal for next year? And then how does that then feed down into all of the different teams across the business?
Yeah, and I think one sort of important caveat, I guess, that you have made is around the fact that in some cases it's not perfect. And I think, for lots of cases, at least from my own experience and what I'd recommend to people is in some cases, don't let perfect get in the way of good. That in some cases, just to have a process can be the hardest part is getting it off the ground, getting all the necessary buy-in, and to demonstrate that to, in your case, your customers, your partners, and the wider industry as well. Obviously for IMEX, given it's an event that does serve the events industry, industry and the meetings industry on a wider basis as well. Just the points that you've mentioned, around where I know that you do have your own, be it targets or objectives, some of those are data based. For data that you are either capturing from Explori, from any other data, I guess things like attendee numbers, other feedback that's captured, could you talk me through any ways that you do share back that message and what you've learned about the event and your wider community, and how you share that back with your customers and partners?
Yeah, I guess it varies for different audiences. We do our overall show stats, which we're very transparent about who's been, where they've come from, the size of and the number of meetings that have gone on in the show. But we also do some quite detailed reporting. One of the things that came up is, how do you put value on exhibiting? How do you put value on sponsorship? And the team have done some fantastic work bringing together all the different data points of movement around the show, kind of who's then going on to have a meeting, who, like, trying to show a way of it's not just a static show, but actually demonstrating that trying to demonstrate a return on investment, which is something that we've seen in the surveys. It's really important to exhibitors. We've also launched we're calling it it's not return on investment, it's more return on opportunity, looking at how did they perform at the show. And I think that's just our starting point into how do we give more insights to people about what they're doing at the show. The challenge as an organizer is, you don't know what's happened after the meeting. So you don't know what's actually converted into business. And that bit we will never know, and I wouldn't expect us to, but it's how can we demonstrate the value of bringing the right people to those stands, to those events, whatever they might be that's happening on the show floor. So there's different elements that we do. And then, of course, we work very closely with our other partners as well to make sure that our relationships with them continue to grow and evolve, because IMEX as a show has a whole host of events that happened around the edge with different associations, different industry partners and bodies. And so it's important that we keep that, because that's a really important, like you say, we're the part of the industry. We're not just the show, that it's much more than just the show.
And I guess you've mentioned already, I guess, because based on what you've said, around sharing that again, the fact that it is a wider community as well around your events. It isn't just the show's there, that's the opening hours of the show closes and everyone goes home again. There is so much more, I guess, around that, and to ensure that, I guess, where, again, you said, where you can't be sure of what the outcomes were from putting all these people together, but at least to know that actually if that's what they're doing and that's what you are putting in place, then at least then there is things that they can do that was within their control as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All good. So I do just have, I guess, a couple other questions for you, I guess, just based on some of the things you've mentioned already, and as well, just a few other things I think would be good to hear your input for as well. And I guess it's just around, for everything else that you've mentioned, talking about change that you make, talking about decisions where data either confirms that you are on the right track, that it backs up a hunch that you already have, or at least it informs in some capacity that there is a chance to make a change. I guess, could you talk me through either as broad or as specific as you're able to? Any decisions where, for example, either data has challenged an existing thought, if it's either invalidated the decision to change something, or I guess you aren't blindly following data, but it just supports what you're doing as well. If you have any examples that you could share, just based on how data supports and confirms change that you're looking to make.
Yeah, let me think. There's a number of different things we've done over time, and there's some very small things we do, like we've made some catering changes, and then we might put some specific measures in there to look at that performance. Other things, we might put in questions in the survey to test the theory out. So I can't really talk about it, but we're putting one in this survey, which hopefully will inform some decisions down the line. And so we're kind of trying to get ahead by putting the data points in, so that then we can measure that, and then we've got something to benchmark. I guess some of the big ones has been, especially with the technology. I hate to just talk about technology, but I guess it's an easy topic for me to talk about because it was a massive change. I think we saw when it first went in, our scores did dip a little bit because change is always hard. But what we were able to do was take the sentiment of what people were saying in the surveys and make those adaptations to the tech, so that in the next iteration, we've improved it and we've improved it and we've improved it. And that is, we sort of know, you know that there's the problems in certain elements, that there are bits that probably need a bit more enhancement, but having that insight just underlines it. And when you come to think about where do you put your budget, you kind of got that data point to back that up. Yeah, I think the friction that we saw with appointment setting. We've made some massive improvements on that. We try and now use AI to help make more of a use of finding the right people for meetings, because that's always the challenge. We're a really big show, and knowing who to meet is always a challenge. And we've made some positive steps in there, and we're getting good feedback on that now. So it's constant. You don't stop, and I think that's the point with all of this. It's not like, oh, tick, we've completed it, we're on. It's a never-ending cycle of, in a positive way, about what's next, what could we do slightly differently, where is the, not negative, but where's the bit that maybe we're not quite as good as we'd like to be, and making those changes to make the show more successful.
And again, one thing I guess you've mentioned is with budgets as well. And I think where, in some cases, if you condense it down to a very simple point, and, maybe if your customers and partners, if they didn't know and just think, oh, that's easy, we can just change that. But in some cases, obviously where you've got the reality of budget, or in some cases trying to secure budget to make these changes, I guess is to understand actually what can you do, what changes on the lighter budget side versus actually changes where in some cases maybe quite fundamental, and normally fundamental means expensive, quite these broad changes, and you do need a little bit of help that you can get to back and ensure that for any decisions that involves a big cost outlay, that you are acting with the best of your knowledge.
Absolutely. And, we're very fortunate in the business because we do things because we think they're the right things, and we don't always do it based on cost. Obviously, cost comes into it at some point. But I think the larger challenge for us is the timing of when you make that change, because we don't very often get off of the kind of the revolving floor of the next show. And it's like, so actually it's really key to get that planned in properly, to think, well, when do things go live? When can we make that change? When can we do that analysis to make sure we're making the right change? Because that, for me, is just as challenging as the budget. Don't get me wrong, budget's always, you've got to make sure you're spending the money in the best possible place. But I think because we very much try not to approach it from what tech's cool, let's put that in. We look at, what do our customers need? What do our people need? Where are the big pain points? Where are the time savings we could make from a processing point of view? Where are the areas we could enhance the experience at the show? That's what's more important to me, to a point. Don't get me wrong, budget always comes in, but that for me is the most important thing, looking at those elements first, and then looking at, well, actually, could tech have that? And it's not always a technology answer. Some of it is about just creating that experience, creating that space, allowing people to think. And I think one of our challenges as an organizer is that we're solution people. Everyone here is trying to solve the problem, because we're used to being at show and you've got to fix that thing in the moment. So we have to spend a lot of time sort of pulling back people to say, okay, but what's the actual problem? What are we trying to achieve? Let's stop talking about the solution. Let's look at what we're trying to achieve. Why are we trying to achieve it? And then it's easier to move forward. But I'm just as bad. I can't help it. I'll see the solution before we even talked about what the problem is.
And I guess as well, in some cases where, potentially it's a bit of a blessing, but where to make change to an event that by at least our customer experience metrics, you are very high performing, rather than changing things because they're broken. In some cases, to identify that is relatively straightforward. I'm sure people would tell you all about it if that was the case. But I guess in your specific case, talking about shows that historically, the sentiment towards them is very strong, well-respected, well-known brands. I guess to talk through and just ensure that, again, in your case where you are making change, is almost to not upset things, and even if they're minor frustrations that a few people may have, balancing that, I guess, with a wider, well-performing show. There's obviously some nuance and finessing that needs to happen there to ensure that you're improving on a good thing rather than fundamentally changing what makes your event special.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a prime example for this show cycle is we saw a pain point in how partners register. So if you're the exhibiting coordinator, you're inviting your partners to come onto your stand. And whereas before it was down to the partner to make sure they registered before they could do anything. And it sounds like a simple change now in hindsight, but we've made a change to make the first thing the partner has to do is ensure their registration is complete, which I know sounds silly, but actually it wasn't really working like that. And so we were getting kind of frustration from partners of, well, I'm logging in, there's nothing there. And actually we just changed the process slightly, and we've seen a 20% improvement year on year at this point in completion of those profiles. So that little thing, and listening to our customers and listening to our internal teams about their frustration and the emails they receive, it's allowed us to make those changes. So I think it's constantly listening, constantly just tweaking and refining rather than mass wholesale change, because I don't think A, we need to do that, and B, the audience would warm to that. But as you say, we're a well-loved brand and show, and it's those 5-10%. It's like, how do you make that little bit? Just turn this dial. How do we improve that? And we have such strong relationships with our audience. It just makes those things easier because you can talk to them, you can test theories, we can go to a key partner and say, look, we're thinking about doing this. How would you feel? Like, we can have those honest conversations, which I think is so important that it's hard to put a value on that.
Great answer, thank you. And I guess specifically, like Gary, for you and your role as CEO of, quite often some of the changes that you're involved in and some of the conversations that you're having, they probably won't ever get a press release. They probably won't have a lot of fanfare. But, to keep a successful show and a successful event running, I guess, they're just as important, even if people wouldn't even notice it unless you pointed to them and said, this is different. And hopefully you can see why.
That's the thing, isn't it? Like, these incremental little changes that we make across the business all the time, to whether it's looking at how people operate, the processes they run. It's not a valued press release, but actually when you add all of those bits up, you can just see the show growing and being more and more successful. When I joined, it was the COVID years, which was a very strange time to be in events, and we've come back so fast and bigger and better, and it's so lovely to see. And it's so lovely to see all of those things that we've put in play means that internally the teams can be more efficient and effective. Like I say, it's not perfect, it never will be, but we can see how there's less admin things that people are doing, which means they've got more time for the relationships they're working on, which means then ultimately we have a better show, and all of those things add up together.
And definitely, I think to the point that you've just made, and definitely, I guess the changes, the pandemic for a lot of people, and the lockdown, and the live events disappearing for a period of time was at least for my experience in the industry over a decade now, is sort of the largest change I have seen. And definitely, we had our Channel Insights report that we conducted last year, and actually, there definitely has been a sort of a permanent shift over the last few years now, of this idea that if trade shows or exhibitions or events weren't, we could still probably meet some of our objectives. And lo and behold, our events went away for a little while, and actually the perception towards that was very different. And then we've seen a substantial uptick in experience metrics across the board for all of our customers, just where in some cases customers and partners and exhibitors actually now have a clearer view of actually, well, what do they want from an event? What does an event like IMEX do for somebody where previously they may attend just because it was the thing to be done, they would always go, but actually to now look at that and sort of actually understand, well, this is now what I need from an event like IMEX, and that's the reason why they.
Yeah, and I think that's why you'll see that our talking point that this year is Design Matters, because we recognise that experience is such an important part of coming to a show. You can't just do the same as forever. Like, it doesn't work. People want more. Different generations, or what the experience is why people go, and the buzz that we create our show is like nothing I've experienced anywhere else. And the analogy is, it's like the tap turns on in the morning when you stand in the hallway, especially in America where they sort of funnel through, and it's like a tap of people that just turns on, and suddenly this wave of people just come, and the outpouring of just it's hard to bottle that noise and that feeling, but it's so lovely that people are coming for the experience, and that's what we're always pushing. And that's why we think for the industry that's really important, which is why we focused our talking point on Design Matters. And there's more and more experiences at our shows, which shows that it's not just about coming to exhibition stands, it's about the experience you can get at the show.
Great point. I guess with that in mind, then, I guess sort of looking ahead to the future, we spent a lot of time talking about things you've already done and, the benefit that you're seeing there. I guess just to talk about, what's coming next. Obviously, you've mentioned sort of a big talking point for your upcoming events that you have. I guess really then, what else are you sort of looking forward, I guess, as far as the future is concerned, and, where your shows are going, around what are you building? Is there anything else, I guess, that you're looking at and thinking that's something that we need to be aware of or are looking towards because we feel that's what our customers are looking for?
I think the main thing is building on that experience at the show. And, I'm going to mention AI because everyone talks about AI and it's a really important part. But for me, it's not about replacing that human interaction. It's about how do we enhance that human interaction? How do we make sure that people can find the right people? How can we make sure that they're having the best experience when they're at the show? Because what I've seen from the pandemic is more and more people want that human interaction. I've seen our shows get bigger and bigger and bigger, And I think that that's the next phase for me is how do we make sure that experience is the best it can possibly be? How do we make sure that when they're thinking about where they want to go next, we're able to tell them, hey, why don't you look at this? Or it's about continuing to enhance that experience and continuing to look at how do we adapt and improve our processes, because like I say, they're not perfect. Like they're so much better than they ever were, but there's always more that we can do. And that's where things like AI and automation really help. But I don't see the show fundamentally shifting. I think it's about building on the success and that smart iteration of what can we do to enhance this audience, or how can we give a better experience for these people. That's where I see the next thing, and that's where now we've got this really solid foundation. How do we build on that? And like I say, it's not about resting on your laurels. It's not about just delivering the same thing. It's about what does our audience want? How can we make our people here happier? How can we just make sure that experience is just grown and grown and grown? And kind of lead that way for the industry to make sure that the people are coming and looking at our show and go, hey, we should take that bit. That really matters. And also pushing us as well, because that's really important.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. I guess just a few more questions then as we come towards the end of this session. I guess just again to come back to talking about data and the role that data plays in the data and insight play in helping to look at the future. I guess is there anything else that you're doing, I guess, to demonstrate to anybody else that you're looking to, be it your existing customers, prospects, other stakeholders, I guess around using that to just ensure that you are, I guess, doing all that you can to run in your eyes the most successful show that you can.
Yeah, I mean, we're investing heavily in from a time point of view as well to make sure that we've got all of our data points so that we can truly derive insight from it. Like I say, we've been collecting data now for a few years in the same format. It's like, how do we bring that together and drive insight from that? And I think one of the first points is how do we give that insight to our customers, but also how do we ask the right questions internally? And we're definitely in, it's in the works at the moment. It's something that we're really focusing our energy on, because I fundamentally believe we've got all of this really fantastic data that we can turn into insight that can benefit our customers. It's there. It's just like asking the right questions of it. And I think that's the big challenge with data and insights is what are you actually trying to get out? What are the questions that you want to ask? Because the tech can help you, but you need to know what you want to ask to do that starting point. And that for me is one of the key things I want to work on over the next year.
Oh, that's great. And I guess as well, I guess if you did have any advice, or I guess for any other, be it organizers or companies that are trying to, run their own events as well, I guess just based on your knowledge and experience, and I guess what you've benefited from, to have that data, that data approach to the way that you do things. I guess is there any advice that you'd be able to offer?
I think that don't be precious of the data. Like, make sure you're collecting it because you've got a reason to collect it. Don't just collect it for collection's sake. Have some thought about that, but definitely listen to your customers and your internal people. Don't just launch straight into buying more tech, because more tech won't necessarily solve it. I know I shouldn't say that as a technologist. My background is data and marketing, and for me, technology is that enabler. Don't get caught up in just grabbing the next tech. You've got to have what you're trying to achieve with it, and that's the same with data. And thinking ahead in how do you structure that? How do you bring it together? How do you make sure you can see patterns and trends across different collection points? I think that's a really important part of the whole journey.
And I guess to echo your point, Gary, because I guess around sort of talking about data and the collection of that, and so that's something that I would say that we advocate for, as well as actually to understand exactly what you're doing with your data, why are you capturing it, what are you doing here, and I guess sort of it's not something you're going to be actually using or you can't foresee a use. Is that something you actually need?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, you can collect data about everything nowadays. Will it always be useful? Not all of it, some of it, absolutely. And then it's about how can you share that with your customers to allow them to grow and evolve, because they're the ones that ultimately, if you can give them better value, and they're going to have a better experience and they're going to keep coming back.
Yeah, and just before we wrap up as well, obviously the fact that you've been able to join us today, and you've been able to share such valuable insight with us and with the people that are going to listen to this afterwards. If you could just maybe talk about Explori and from how we've worked with IMEX now for a number of years, and the part that we're playing to help you on this journey, which you've so clearly laid out today, around the role that data has had in your strategy and the decisions that you make and change that you make as a result of data and the insight that you're working towards. I guess could you just talk us through around Explori Explori, and obviously we've been a valued partner of yours for the last few years. I guess if you could talk through, I guess, the role that Explori's had in that relationship of supporting you on this journey.
Yeah, Explore is a really important part of our cycle. And doing the surveys, post shows, they form an important part of our planning. What we've been doing with you guys actually over the last year, 18 months is also reinventing that, because we've been doing the same thing forever. And actually, we've looked at how can we make that process of feedback more efficient? How can we align the feedback that you give to initiatives we do, so then it becomes more valuable for us, rather than just hearing, well, this group said this and this group said that. Actually, what we've done with you guys is then align that to the goals of the things we've been working on, so then it becomes even more valuable. And I think, I always feel like this. I don't like a supplier relationship. It's about a partnership, and I think that's what we do really well with you guys. That we partner with you, and we can have very open conversations about what's working, what's not working, and I think that's just got stronger and stronger over the last few years as we've improved that process, and it becomes more and more valuable for the internal team to take that moment to stop, listen to the feedback, and then make adjustments on the back of that.
And then, yeah, one other thing I guess you mentioned as well, I guess, is the fact that that is for when we do come in and present the results to you at the back of your events, is to have that the whole team, that as many people that can attend are also in attendance as well.
Yeah, that's really important to us. And I think if we go back a few years, it was a very, very, very long meeting, but we've made adjustments to focus on the really key things. And that, I think, has really helped in our relationship with you guys to show where you can add true value to what we're looking at. And we're constantly looking at the survey. We're doing it right now, ready for the next show. What are the right questions? Is there things we want to delve into this time? We're constantly having those discussions so that we're set up for success each time.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And obviously, I've got what coming up next month, which I'm sure is going to come around before you know it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'll be here, and then we'll be into America.
And that's going to come around very quickly as well. Gary, so thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, and I appreciate your insight.
No worries. Thank you.